Hello, I'm Hal Wake in Vancouver.
Et je suis Claudia Larochelle à Montréal. Cette année et en 2021, le Canada est l'invité d'honneur de la Foire du livre de Francfort. La pandémie nous a obligés à adapter notre programmation, mais notre objectif reste le même, révéler notre identité au singulier pluriel sur la scène mondiale en présentant des auteurs et illustrateurs canadiens reconnus. C'est l'occasion aujourd'hui, à défaut de pouvoir traverser l'Atlantique avec eux, de vous les présenter virtuellement dans le confort de votre foyer ou où que vous soyez.
As far back as cave paintings, humans have used pictures to tell stories. Graphic novelists and children's book illustrators have a growing audience eager to explore and enjoy the interplay between words and visual language. For this discussion, we'll be looking into the joys and challenges of illustrating books in a myriad of shapes and forms. We're very pleased to introduce you to two author illustrators and an author of graphic books to learn how they create worlds of enchantment and magic.
Il nous fait plaisir de vous présenter certains de nos meilleurs auteurs et illustrateurs au Canada. Guillaume Perrault, Sydney Smith et David Alexander Robertson.
Sydney Smith lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He's illustrated numerous children's books, including Sidewalk Flowers by John Arno Lawson, Town is by the Sea by Joanna Schwartz, and his own authorial debut, Small in the City. Among many prizes, Sydney's books have been 4 times selected for the New York Times, New York Public Library Best Illustrated Children's Book List, and won 2 Governor General's Literary Awards.
Guillaume Perrault est un illustrateur et un auteur de Rimouski qui habite Trois-Rivières, au Québec. Il a signé des dizaines de livres comme illustrateur et 3 à titre d'auteur. Cumulus et 2 albums de la série Le Facteur de l'espace, qui a été primé au Salon du livre et de la presse jeunesse Seine-Saint-Denis en France. Il a aussi été invité d'honneur au Comic Salon jeunesse d'Erlangen en Allemagne. Et finalement, l'auteur David Alexander Robertson, membre de la Nation Cree de Norway House, réside à Winnipeg, au Manitoba. Il est connu pour ses livres jeunesse, ses romans graphiques et ses romans qui ont remporté de nombreux prix, notamment le prix littéraire du gouverneur général pour son album When We Were Alone sur le régime des pensionnats autochtones.
To start the conversation, we asked everyone to talk about their own beginning in art and how their own practice has evolved over the years.
Je pense que, comme tous les enfants, j'ai pris un crayon à un certain point dans ma vie. J'ai commencé à bricoler, à dessiner, puis j'ai juste jamais arrêté.
I was drawn to drawing as much as every child is. It wasn't until I was a little bit older that it became a place for me to escape to. It was a place where I could explore and create, and it was a safe haven for me.
I started as a writer when I was really in elementary school. It was something that I always felt drawn to. I was in grade 3, and my teacher gave us this assignment to write poetry. And I was always a shy kid back in elementary, so I took my paper and my pencil and I hid in the back of the closet and closed the closet in the dark, and I started writing poetry. And I found that I just fell in love with writing.
Ça a été très naïf, ça a été pour passer le temps, je pense. Je pense que pour moi, l'art, ça a été un moment où je me suis trouvé, où je me trouvais pas vraiment à l'école, je me trouvais pas vraiment dans... J'avais des bons amis, une bonne bande d'amis, mais on dirait que pour moi, le dessin, c'était l'exutoire. C'était le moment de m'amuser, c'était le moment de vivre autre chose que le quotidien qui peut être plate de temps en temps.
I moved around a lot when I was younger, and during those times, you know, I didn't have a lot of people in my life, and so I had my family, but I also had drawing, and drawing was where I went. I went into it very deeply, and it was during those years where most people will kind of drift away from drawing as a way of playing. I continued to enjoy art until I went to art school, and then it became more of a serious thing.
Le design graphique m'apparaissait comme la seule avenue logique en disant ça va lier art et un métier qui va me donner des sous. Fait que c'est comme ça que ça a commencé. Ça a fait mes armes. J'ai appris des techniques, là, j'ai appris des trucs indispensables dans ma carrière. Mais un jour, j'ai décidé de quitter puis d'aller à mon compte pour devenir illustrateur et auteur, comme je suis en fait.
It's in my blood. Like as an indigenous person, we always pass down our values, beliefs, traditions, legends, histories through storytelling. And then when I was growing up, I feel I was very disconnected from my indigenous identity. So as I got older and I started to reconnect with what it meant for me to be Cree, and tried to think about how I could merge that, coming to myself as a Cree person and my love of writing. I really wanted to write stories that would educate others about Indigenous people.
One of my professors suggested to me that, you could do children's books, you could do book illustration, and it all kind of lined up in my head. It's like, that's it, it's perfect. I'm lucky that way because I don't really think I could do anything else.
Devenir expert dans son art nécessite du travail. Combien d'efforts nos invités ont-ils dû déployer pour s'améliorer et développer leur écriture et leurs illustrations? Et qu'est-ce qui les met au défi sur le plan artistique? Nous leur avons demandé.
Les défis au niveau de l'illustration, on peut le voir de plein de manières, parce que là, on dirait qu'avec la question, on peut tout de suite penser à des défis concrets et physiques. C'est-à-dire, j'ai de la difficulté de dessiner un cheval. On s'entend. Il y a certaines choses, là, il y a des clichés dans le domaine de l'illustration qui sont les escaliers, les vélos et les chevaux. Ce sont trois choses qui sont difficiles à dessiner. Il y a d'ailleurs un blog là-dessus. Il y a un blog d'illustrateurs qui se mettent au défi de dessiner un cheval sur un vélo dans les escaliers. C'est comme un exercice créatif juste pour le fun parce que c'est un running gag que le vélo est un peu complexe pour certains. C'est drôle parce que l'illustration, on pourrait imaginer que on est tous des personnes hyper visuelles puis qui sont super bons avec leurs capacités spatiales, mais c'est vraiment pas le cas. Il y a beaucoup d'illustrateurs qui ont besoin d'avoir j'ai besoin de ma tasse de café pour dessiner une tasse de café, sinon je comprends pas comment elle est faite. Moi, j'ai une certaine facilité avec ça. Je peux dessiner pas mal tout de mémoire, ça fonctionne super bien. Mais c'est pour ça que le running gag du vélo puis du vient, parce qu'on se dit, quel morceau est rattaché au rayon puis au pédalier, puis attends une minute, ma pédale est pas sur la bonne roue. Puis mais ça, c'est des trucs plus techniques, en fait. Là. Pour moi, la portion texte, la portion écrite, c'est ce qui me demande le plus d'efforts, du moins en ce moment. Je suis pas un grand romancier, j'apprends constamment par rapport à ça. J'ai dû prendre des livres de techniques de scénarisation. J'ai dû contacter des amis auteurs qui m'ont donné des conseils, qui m'ont coaché même. Donc, ouais, c'est un sacré beau défi, je dirais.
I feel like I'm a very hard-working writer. I read a lot too, and so it helps me to understand approaches to storytelling, structuring stories, character development, style of writing, and different genres of writing. And so that's helped me immensely in trying to be the best writer that I can be in the books that I choose to write, and how I try to learn and grow as a writer. And I do that by challenging myself to write in forms that I'm not comfortable with. And so that's how I try to challenge myself and be the best that I can be.
For me, I can't work on a book unless I'm trying something new. Whether it's within the structure of the story, the perspective of a character, or the actual execution of the art. Maybe it's a new medium, maybe I leave something out, put something new in, try something new. And it's all dependent on this type of story that I'm telling or the type of story that's being told. I have to draw all the time. I have to. It's not because I'm serious about it. I am serious about it. I have to draw all the time because it's a muscle. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. I need to go out and sketch. I have no choice because if I let it slip, then I'm not comfortable. I don't have faith in that invisible force.
Il est très important dans la représentation des gens, du temps ou du territoire d'être précis afin d'être authentique, mais aussi significatif. On a demandé à nos invités ce que ça implique comme travail de recherche.
I think depicting people authentically and accurately is inherently meaningful, right? So, in the stories that I write, I'm very meticulous in my research to make sure that I am accurate in the representation of history, the representation of character. And I think that authenticity lies in that accuracy as well. And the meaningfulness of the story lies in that authenticity and accuracy as well. So I think they're all interconnected, right? So any story that so even a fiction story, I need to be accurate, I need to be authentic, and I need to be meaningful in how I approach that storytelling. But even in like a story like The Barren Grounds, that story, even though it happens in another world, I still seek authenticity and accuracy in those stories, right? And that's very important, and you can do that, and that is meaningful. All of that goes through and how you connect with readers and what they take from those stories.
I think that it is important to do research, especially when you're working with very specific people, specific places, and specific times. But what comes from the research I've found is not details. I mean, there are some details. Town is by the sea. There's a very specific type of tea that they drank. There's a specific type of flour that they had on their shelves. The shapes of the houses. But beyond those small details, the people are the same. People are the same everywhere you go. I mean, there's different customs, different ways people dress, people look differently, but at the essence of everyone, we're all the same. And that's what research brings. You go to a place you've never been before, you think it's exotic, and you realize they're just like me. And that's, I think, what research brings.
Je fais pas beaucoup d'illustrations de bande dessinée, si on pourrait dire, historiques. Donc, j'ai rarement besoin de faire de la recherche en ce sens. Ce que j'aime beaucoup faire, moi, c'est mélanger des fois un peu les époques. J'aime beaucoup mélanger une époque victorienne avec le début du cinéma, mais les gens ont des iPhones quand même. Ça me plaît de faire ça. Dans le facteur de l'espace, on est dans le futur, avec une technologie qui a l'air assez rétro-futuriste, en fait. Les vaisseaux spatiaux sont un peu sont rapiécés. Il y a quand même des petites plantes dans des pots, des tablettes pour dessiner, mais au papier. En même temps, il y a des robots. Donc, j'aime beaucoup faire un espèce de mix and match de tout ça, de prendre le meilleur de toutes les époques. Si je fais une bande dessinée ou une illustration qui est actuelle, des fois, j'aime mieux illustrer un vieux téléphone parce que c'est plus beau qu'un iPhone. La même chose avec une télévision des années 80. Qui étaient magnifiques, ces télés-là. Les vieilles télés en bois, c'est pas mal plus beau à dessiner qu'une nouvelle télé flat screen. C'est sûr que si on fait une bande dessinée historique, on a besoin quand même d'être précis. Ça, c'est sûr et certain. Mais outre ça, moi, j'ai aucun problème à avoir des anachronismes. J'ai aucun problème à avoir des images, des objets, des peuples qui sont peut-être décalés. Moi, je trouve ça intéressant. Puis j'ai aucun problème avec ça. Au contraire.
Let's find out when these artists began to work with words and images and what sent them down that path.
The idea of writing and illustrating my own book was always assumed to be the next step. As an illustrator who collaborates with other people, of course, eventually you want to make your own book. And I did. I enjoyed it. I created something I was proud of. But writing for yourself is hard. It's hard. It's really hard. I gained a lot of respect for authors through the process of writing for myself. I was able to write a story in a way that I wanted to see it, but it was almost too much power. I could go back and rewrite it. And at a certain point, you don't know if it's good or if it's bad. Words just look like letters on a page. You're eyes don't work anymore. I'm not a writer, I'm an artist who writes.
En tant qu'illustrateur, j'ai commencé ma carrière en illustrant des livres d'autres personnes, des textes de d'autres personnes. C'était bien, j'ai adoré ce que j'ai fait, mais il y a beaucoup de moments où je me disais « Ah, c'est une bonne histoire, mais j'aurais aimé ça explorer tel truc. » Ou je pense que j'avais des choses à dire, moi, puis j'avais ce désir de créer non seulement une image que j'adore créer, mais de créer une vie autour de ça, de créer l'univers, puis dans le cas du Facteur de l'espace, de créer la galaxie autour de ça. Donc, c'est d'être capable d'être le maître de mon petit monde, de mon petit univers, en fait. On se sent des fois un peu comme Dieu quand on est un illustrateur, parce qu'on invente des personnages, on invente des modes, on invente des visages, on invente des décors, des mondes. Puis c'est ce qui me fascine. Puis d'être capable d'être l'auteur de mon propre univers, je me sens comme un créateur avec un C majuscule, là.
I grew up reading comics, so it was what taught me about the world, right? So it was one of the only things that interested me in terms of literature as a child. I read thousands of comic books when I was a kid. As I got older, I recognized first, I think, how engaging it would be for kids to write stories in a comic book form that they could learn from in the classroom. And I thought that would be very exciting for students of all ages. So when I made a choice to start writing comics, it was a very deliberate decision because I thought that it would be the best way that kids could learn in the classroom because of the power that words and pictures have when you put them together. The first way that we communicated as human beings was through sequential art. So we painted pictures on walls, and it told stories. And so comics have been around before there were words, whether it's on tapestries or whether it's on pottery, whether it's on walls, whatever form it took, that's how we talk to each other. We are visual learners, and we always have been. And images help us to draw meaning out of words that words can't do on their own.
With such a long history of illustration to draw on, are there any guiding principles regarding the combination of words and pictures? Or is each project a blank slate for these artists, and they have to explore and discover how to tell that particular story?
Artists and illustrators usually develop rules to how they work. I use this type of pen, I use this type of paper, I use this type of paint, and I only do this, and I never shade like this, and I never do this. And I found that that was way too confining, and that what I had to do for myself was to break those rules and become uncomfortable. I had to be uncomfortable, and that's when something really magical happens. And when that magic starts happening, you become really addicted to that magic. That no longer is it okay to plan a drawing, execute the drawing, and it'll look exactly the way you planned. It has to be better than what you expected because you're experimenting, you're taking risks, you're trying something, you stop yourself, you throw it away, then you go back to it. And it's all about, you flip it upside down maybe. I don't know, like you have to find something magical within it for it to be a success. And that really speaks to the moment that you create the art. Because there's something that happens that you can't plan for, that you can't sit down and say, and then at this point, magic will start happening, the drawing will take over, and I just sit back and watch. But that's kind of what happens. The drawing takes over. Your pen, your hand, it starts doing something that is beyond your control, and you sit back and you watch. And you can't plan for it, and some days it doesn't happen. Some days it happens. Some people think it's a deity, that it's not. It's something that always finds you when you're busy. So you can't just sit around and wait for it. You have to always be painting, always be drawing, and then that moment happens.
J'ai pas de règles fixes quand je crée un projet. Je suis pas un illustrateur qui a un style graphique qui est coulé dans le béton. D'un travail à l'autre, je vais pouvoir changer mes règles. Mais pour moi, chaque projet, je le vois comme un nouvel univers. Je le vois comme un canevas blanc. Je me dis, qu'est-ce que l'auteur veut dire dans ce livre-là? Qu'est-ce que mon client, pour son affiche publicitaire, veut dire? Puis je me permets de m'amuser. Je me dis, qu'est-ce que j'ai le goût de faire aujourd'hui? Qu'est-ce que j'ai le goût de faire? Je pense que c'est la beauté d'être illustrateur. C'est oui, on répond à la demande des fois d'un client. Des fois on répond à notre propre demande. Des fois, il faut se voir comme un client quand on crée nos livres. Mais c'est qu'on a la chance de créer qu'est-ce qui nous plaît aujourd'hui. C'est pas parce que mon dernier contrat, je l'ai fait en 2 couleurs avec des formes géométriques que mon prochain est obligé d'être fait comme ça. Là, je peux m'amuser, je peux changer de style complètement. J'aime pas ça me donner des règles en création, en fait. Mais j'aime quand on me donne des règles, par contre. Ça, c'est intéressant. Si un client me dit on n'a pas beaucoup de budget, on veut l'imprimer en 2 couleurs, OK, bien super, ça va me permettre. Là, ça me donne une règle, une contrainte créative. Puis j'adore, parce que là, c'est comme ça qu'on est capable de créer des nouveaux styles, des fois une nouvelle approche, à dire j'ai jamais travaillé en 2 couleurs. De plein gré, je l'aurais jamais fait, mais là, un client me demande de le faire. OK, un défi, let's go, ça va être cool, je vais l'essayer. D'être capable de dire, je vais faire un livre de 150 pages, mais en noir et blanc, comme ça m'est arrivé. J'ai jamais fait ça. OK, noir et blanc. J'ai toujours eu l'espèce de béquille de la couleur, mais là, le noir et blanc, il va falloir que je réfléchisse d'une autre manière. Il y a beaucoup de trucs que je serais pas capable de représenter d'un côté émotif de la même manière. Il va falloir que je le passe juste avec un crayon, puis je peux pas avoir les béquilles de la couleur. Comment je le fais? Donc, j'aime pas me donner des règles, mais j'aime quand on me donne des règles, parce que ça m'apporte beaucoup plus comme ça, je pense.
Every book is a blank slate before I start. I don't really know how I'm going to approach the script for that story at the time when I start it. The important thing that I've been able to do is to understand the relationship in a really intimate way. When does a panel need a word in it? And those are decisions you make on the fly. So, from panel to panel, from page to page, from comic to comic, those decisions change depending on what it needs. And sometimes when you see a final piece of art, sometimes you'll change your script as those final art pieces are coming in and you didn't expect at the start. So you had this great piece of dialogue that you wanted in this panel. And then you see the final art and you realize they don't need to say anything because their actions are saying everything that you wanted them to say. Sometimes the words are less important. Almost always the words are less important. And the images are the really important thing in a graphic novel. So you have to understand when your words aren't necessary. I could write like a 30-page comic book. And it could be like a 45-page script. And there would be not a word that would appear in the final comic. And someone might read the comic and be like, well, what did Dave Robertson do for this book? He didn't write anything. And they would never know that I wrote a 45-page script for that comic, and you have to be okay with that. That's where the ego comes in. You have to just kind of take that away and just tell the best story.
Créer des livres illustrés, peu importe leur forme, demande souvent un travail collaboratif entre auteurs et illustrateurs. Comment se déroule donc cette collaboration?
It's collaborative work in the sense that I work with their text. There's not a lot of back and forth, but I'm drawn to text that is minimal so that there's a lot of space for interpretation. My interpretation, the illustrator's interpretation, and the reader's interpretation. You always need to leave space. As a writer, you leave space for illustrator. As an illustrator, you leave space for the reader. There's always space that needs to happen, and too often people will fill the manuscript. There's no space for illustration. Or the illustration will fill the book, and there's no place for the reader to interpret anything themselves. And that's, I think, one of the big realizations I had as an illustrator was that the illustration makes the reality. The reader always looks to the illustration for the truth. It's a real mutual dependency between the text and the illustration. In these cases where you can't tell the story fully without presence of the images. And if you just saw the images, you couldn't understand the story fully without the text. And so it's this perfect, beautiful balance.
For a graphic novel, I'll give very precise details. So I will like sometimes even go down to where their hands are positioned, where their body positioning is, how's their posture, what's their eyes look like, what's their facial expressions. And I'll write that all in a very detailed script. It'll look a lot like a movie script. So that for graphic novels, it probably more so. For a picture book, it might be very, very minimal direction to the illustrator, if at all. I just let them be inspired by the words and draw a beautiful drawing. My scripts have become a little more open to give the illustrators room to be creative on their own and to imagine the stories a bit differently than I might have. And I have to be okay with that. And more than that, I have to embrace that and allow them to do their work and to make the story the best that it can be.
Dans le processus de création d'un livre, quand c'est pas moi qui l'écris, quand on me propose un texte, c'est la maison d'édition qui vient voir l'illustrateur. Ça, c'est à moi de dire si le texte m'intéresse ou pas. Mais après ça, oui, c'est une bonne collaboration entre l'éditeur, l'illustrateur et l'auteur. C'est d'être capable d'avoir une bonne connexion entre ce triangle amoureux-là que ça crée, en fait. Puis c'est d'être capable de voir qu'est-ce que l'auteur voulait dire. Il faut pas le voir comme si c'était une commande. Moi, je le vois pas comme si c'était une commande. On n'est pas en train de le transposer mot à mot. On est capable de se dire, OK, oui, on va prendre ton texte, mais on va l'apporter à un niveau supplémentaire. Puis les auteurs avec lesquels j'ai travaillé ont beaucoup aimé ça dans le passé parce que généralement, je suis capable de prendre un texte puis de l'apporter à peut-être un deuxième niveau auquel il n'aurait pas pensé parce que l'auteur pense pas d'une manière visuelle. Mais elle est capable de dire, oui, mais tes mots parlent, mais l'image va parler aussi. C'est ça que j'aime beaucoup, d'être capable d'aller chercher les petits éléments que l'auteur n'a pas nécessairement réfléchi puis de les mettre en valeur.
There are now a lot of media that combine images and words to tell a story. Comics, graphic novels, picture books, and much more. They're often political or subversive in their message. We asked our trio how they characterize their approach.
There is a lot of media right now that's political and subversive in comics and other forms of literature. I'm drawn to that. I think that all writing's political. You know, I think that all writing is trying to convey a message, to illustrate a point. One of the most important things in illustrated works right now is to have diversity in them and reflected in them. I mean, that's another thing that I look for in the stuff that I read, is how it's representing the world that I live in and the world that I'm from. We call those own voices stories. And own voices stories are books about marginalized people written by marginalized people that have those lived experiences. And those are the stories that I feel we need to be reading right now, because it's teaching us about each other. And it's a platform that, you know, we never had before as marginalized writers. So, and I think that Indigenous writers are marginalized writers. And so it's really important to me to write stories and to read stories about diverse populations by diverse writers. I don't even think it's a mission of mine as an Indigenous writer to represent diversity, to accurately and truthfully represent history, to write Indigenous characters, to make sure that they have agency and power, and how they're depicted and how they're written and how they move through stories. I think it's a responsibility that I have that I take very seriously.
When I was your age, at home in my community, my friends and I always spoke our language. But at the school I went to, far away from home, they wouldn't let us speak our words. All the children used their strange words, and we didn't understand them at all. Our voices blended together like a flock of crows. Why did they talk in their language, I asked. They didn't like that we spoke our language, Newcomb said. They wanted us to talk like everybody else. But sometimes in the summer,
When we were alone and our teachers weren't anywhere around the place we were, we would whisper to each other in Cree. We would say all the words we weren't allowed to say so that we wouldn't forget them. And this made us happy. Now, Anukum said, I always speak my language.
Ever since I was a kid, I surrounded myself. I used to take a box full of comics and just lay them out all around me and just read them all day. It was great. I loved being homesick from school because I could read comics. All of the comics, the way that they tell stories has obviously influenced me in the way that I now tell stories. But subversive, political, I mean, it's hard to not find anything that's subversive or political, but I don't really think about it in those terms. I'm trying to speak to the experience of being a child as a human, not as a separate organism, not as something that I don't remember or I don't know or does something completely different than me, but I want to speak to the child who has the same feelings as me, the same fears, the same insecurities. But I do acknowledge that children have a wider spectrum of emotions and they're in their face all the time. As an adult, you have the ability to compartmentalize, to shift. I'm gonna feel this later. Oh, that hurts. I'm gonna think about this later, but for now, I got business to do. For kids, they feel it when it comes, they process it. It's not always pretty, sometimes ugly, and often doesn't have a name. And that's something that's really beautiful. These emotions, we don't have labels for them when we're kids. They just hit us, and we have to roll with it. And it's all the time. And I see it in my own kids. I still feel it in myself today, you know. I still have, I deal with a lot of insecurities or doubts or things I don't even have names for. But if I can address that, if I can speak to that within children's books and not speak down to children, but speak to them on the same level, that is my goal.
Je pense pas que je suis un illustrateur ou un auteur qui est très politisé. En ce sens que je trouve que c'est important d'être impliqué en politique et tout ça, mais je dirais que c'est pas nécessairement ma force ou je pense pas que c'est quelque chose que j'essaie de transposer beaucoup dans mon travail. Ça a l'air vraiment niaiseux ce que je vais dire, mais le message que je veux transmettre personnellement quand j'illustre un livre jeunesse, c'est qu'il y a tellement de trucs qui sont lourds sur Terre, qui sont déprimants, qui sont tristes, qui sont effrayantes, puis on le sait très bien, là, je veux dire, on vit une pandémie en ce moment. Je pense que ce que j'aime faire avec mes livres, c'est d'apporter une légèreté des fois. Avec le facteur de l'espace, oui, je peux passer des messages là-dedans sur l'amitié, sur la crainte de l'inconnu, des trucs comme ça. Mais le message du facteur de l'espace, c'est que ça soit drôle, que ça soit jovial, que ça soit léger aussi. Puis la plupart de mes livres aussi, j'aime apporter cette petite touche humoristique. C'est important d'avoir un moment de répit de temps en temps, je trouve. C'est important de dénoncer, c'est important de se lever, de prendre part à des mouvements politiques, des mouvements sociaux, mais je pense que c'est important aussi de temps en temps de rire, de décrocher. Je pense qu'on en a besoin un peu, surtout en ce moment.
We hope today's conversation has given you the desire and the appetite to discover more about Canadian authors and illustrators. I'm Hal Wake in Vancouver. Thanks for watching, but most of all, for reading.
Pour en savoir plus sur les auteurs, les illustrateurs et les événements à venir concernant la présence canadienne à la Foire de Francfort, visitez le site internet canadafbm2020.com. Ici Claudia La Rochelle à Montréal. Merci d'avoir été des nôtres aujourd'hui et tchuss! Bye!